Welcome back to another Tilted Knot video. The last video you saw was the entertainment shelf for the living room. I wanted to do something that matched for the DVDs and pictures, decorations that we have on the other side of the living room, and that's what this video is. Hopefully you enjoy what I put together. This turned out to be somewhat of a practice for future projects. You'll see why as the video progresses, but hopefully you enjoy, and here we go. Alright, this is the shelf that I need to rebuild. It's been fine, there's absolutely nothing wrong with it. However, I want something that's going to match the aesthetics of the rest of the cabinetry that I build, which is going to be made to match that. It again is going to be made out of ash with the same coloring, the India ink for the black, and then the stain that mostly matches our woodwork and how I stained everything in the living room. I started out with marking the box joint for the bottom of the shelf using a piece that I cut off from the shelf. I'm using that to get the proper depth for each of the fingers or the box joints, whichever you want to call them. Here I'm just chiseling out the joints for the bottom, and this will be mated with the sides of the shelf. The chisels I'm using are a Japanese style chisel made by Suizan. I'm pretty sure I'm butchering that name, but I love using these chisels. They are very easy to work with, and I'm able to get a nice clean cut with them. All right, with this portion done, I can go ahead and get the mating edges for the sides marked out, get those cut out. And here I'm getting those marked so that I can be able to get the appropriate spacing and cutouts for the sides. Cutting these joints by hand a year ago is something that I probably would not have done. The class that I took, Wasilla Community College, has given me a little more confidence in my skills and understanding how to cut this kind of joinery, and it's something I'm greatly enjoying. I found for me, cutting the wood in this orientation, especially the ends like this, I'm able to get a cleaner, straighter cut than I do if I lay them down horizontally. With the generate cut, now I can get my lines marked out for the datos. These are going to be a stop dato, which is going to be completely unnecessary. And using my router template and not even thinking, you'll see that I completely blew through the front of the shelf, which negated the stop dato on this first cut. And as you can see, I blew through the front of the shelf side. The other two I cut like I was supposed to, and you'll see me find a piece of filler for that one that I screwed up on, and then realize that I actually don't need it in the long run. And all of these stop datos I could have actually foregone because you'll never see them once I get this trim on the sides. I learned from the other shelf with doing through datos, or through tenons, I should say. It's a lot easier to put the datos first and then go ahead and get the tenons cut. So that's what I did this time around. I started out with taking only a single width pass of the saw blade for each side of the shelf. That way I can get the shoulder at the proper size. And then I snuck up on it in half blade increments from there out until I got the fit that you see here. Okay, here I'm getting the through tenons marked out. These are still 1 inch wide, but they are said to be offset from the fingers on the bottom of the shelf. One thing I've discovered with doing woodworking on using hand tools is I'm not a huge fan of having the marking gauge line going across the wood where it's going to be visible even once everything is put together. With this being hidden, I don't have to worry about that, so I'm just doing a straight line across the entire board. Here again, doing some chisel work to get these through tenons opened up, cleaned up, and ready to mate with the side of the shelf. Getting the through tenons marked turned out to be a little bit trickier and more difficult than I expected. I found it actually easier to mark where the tenons go with a chisel and then go through and use my marking knife to mark out where the wood needed to be mortised out for the through tenons. I discovered during the process of doing this that I needed to also notch out the side of the shelf to accommodate the through tenons on the shelf itself. Here I'm using a 1/2-inch Forstner bit to open up the mortise so I don't have to do the entire thing by hand. And now I'm just cleaning out those mortises, getting them all nice and even and pretty so that I can be able to get the shelf put in with the through tenons. On the back side, I failed to mark these from the beginning, so I had to go back and kind of guess and hope that I was opening up the mortars in the right spot. And after a little bit of cleanup and some minor adjustments, I was able to get the center shelf in with the through tenons in place and have everything mount up nice and flush. And now it's time for a dry fit. This is to make sure that the bottom lines up and that I actually have everything at 90-degree angles. And when cutting stuff like this by hand, there's a very definite direction that it goes. And if you try and put it upside down like I did, it's not going to work. And now I'm just testing out the additional shelves, making sure that the datos and the shoulders datos meet up and are the correct size, and everything looks good and nice and tight. And here I'm fitting that plug for the dado that I blew out the front. I was able to match the grain fairly closely, but again, once the corner piece is on, that's going to be completely unnecessary. And after one more check to make sure everything is actually square and at 90-degree angles, I can go ahead and get ready to get this thing sanded down and get the finish applied. The last step for this process, or this stage of the shelf, is using my handy dandy Dalmax jig so that I can be able to get dowels put in the front, because that is how I'm attaching the top for the shelf, just like I did with the entertainment shelf. I didn't record the sanding process. And this was about 4 hours of sanding, going from a 80 grit all the way to a 240. So now I'm just getting the stain applied on the corners and the top. And then we'll start getting the India ink on the rest of the shelf. And as with the entertainment system, I put an initial coat of India ink on all of the pieces, went around, sanded it back down to with a 240, took off part of the ink, and then applied another layer of ink, and then resanded that down again lightly with at 240, just to help smooth out the wood and give it a little bit of a distressed look. And now it's time to start gluing the thing together. Starting with the bottom, doing the center shelf, which is the one with its through tenons, and then the other two shelves, getting those glued in and clamped in, and getting it set to dry. The glue up on this went extremely well, very few issues. And once I had a few clamps on it, I was able to get everything at 90 degrees and nice and clean. And I followed the same procedure I did with the entertainment shelf with this, using a couple pieces of wood to block the top of it so that I had it in the proper position, and just using some centering pins to put an indent where those dowels are. I was able to get this drilled out and get it set on the dowels and glued in place without any issue. Now, I did not record getting the corner pieces on. I think I just forgot to hit record on that part. And now with the top in place, it's time to lay it on its back, throw some clamps on it, and start working on the bottom trim. And just in case any of you have any questions, glue by itself is not enough to hold a piece of trim on place while you go to grab a couple clamps. All right, with the clamps in place, I can now go ahead and start to get the bottom trim attached. This is the same process that I use on the entertainment shelf. The front skirt is attached using glue, and then I just use some additional strips of wood to attach to the bottom of the shelf and to the back of that front trim. The reason I did this instead of having it open is we discovered when we moved the original entertainment shelf that our cats had deposited and saved probably a dozen different toys underneath the shelf. So this will help keep toys out from underneath of it and just help keep it clean and have it looking nice. And here's a look of the trim once it's added in and everything's ready to finish. Here I'm using the Black Forest furniture oil. This is what I use mainly on everything. And I really like the way that just brings out the coloring and the sheen of the finish and how it works with the ash. And here's a little bit of a beauty shot with it on my workbench, and just need to let it dry for a few days and then we can put it in place. Alright, here's the shelf in place. And I think it turned out pretty good. It has the same styling and look as the other half. It just kind of helps to complete the entire setup. Everything, I think, looks significantly better than what we had. But now, because of that change, the base that everything sits on, I need to redo that. And I need to redo the top shelf so that everything matches and looks a little bit better as well. All of the other wood that we have down here was done years ago using poplar, and I think what I'm going to do is redo this in ash and have it completely different as far as the overall style. And we're going to stain it to match and complement the shelving that I've put together over the last couple of videos. But I appreciate you watching. Hopefully you enjoyed what you saw, gave you some ideas of something you can do, and look forward to seeing you on the next video.